did 6,700. I forgot to reset it after I moved it up.
Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. This is the video many of you have been wanting to see, which was a good comparison between pump gas, E85, and methanol on a naturally aspirated engine. So that's going to happen today in this video. I've got all the dyno results and everything else. But I'm going to cover some other things in this video too, and it may make the video longer, and I know some of you are already thinking, great, another YouTuber just making a video longer. Get to the point. Well, the reason why I'm going to talk about some of this stuff is because it actually saves me from answering some of the comments. And I do think having more comments in a video might make me make more money, but I also don't have a lot of time to respond to them. So I'm just going to try to get it out of the way at the beginning so it makes it easier for you. To me, it's better to teach you something than just to show you something. So here are the three things really that's going to be covered in the video. One, excuse me for the chair. One, I'm going to talk about some things about dynos in general, and then I'm going to tell you the E85 stuff and the whole dyno stuff, because here's what was tested on the dyno. Pump gas, E85, methanol, also a different ignition box and different timing. Those were all tested on the dyno. So you'll get to see those results and everything. I got dyno sheets and everything for that. Then at the end, we're going to look at how those dyno numbers showed up on the track performance with the truck, because now we've already know how the truck ran. I have the ET slips and everything else. We'll see how that compared to the actual dyno. So that's all going to be in this video, but give me just a little bit at the beginning to explain some things, and then I promise you will get to stuff. So here's the first thing I want to talk about, is actual dynos. I'm going to be very general about how they work, but there's some things to it that it needs to be explained. So bear with me here. So first off, the way a dyno works, if you've never been on one, I'm talking about water brake dynos like the Superflows that they use for an engine dyno. These are not the same as a chassis dyno. They work in a multitude of different ways. We're just going to focus on engine dyno. Essentially what they do is they've got a device similar to a torque converter on the back of the engine. And for those who don't know what a torque converter is, you can think of two fans that face each other. One spins, and as it moves, it's going to, in the fan situation, move air that spins the other blade. In a dyno, it's water. Water doesn't compress. So they have a pump that feeds water in. Remember, I'm being real general. Feeds water into one side of the blade and the valve that lets it out. And as the engine turns, it will spin that blade. And the amount of water that's coming in one side prevents the engine from accelerating as fast as it does, or how fast that water leaves that one side of the turbine itself. That's essentially how it works. So it's just pretty much water slowing the engine down or allowing it to accelerate at a certain RPM rate. Now, because it's grabbing the engine and holding it down, the way it actually measures horsepower and torque, it really doesn't measure so much horsepower, it's measuring torque, is this. On the dyno, it's got something called a strain gauge. And what it is it takes a certain amount of, it's just a kind of a piece of metal, and it takes a certain amount of force to cause this gauge to open up or to close down. And they calibrate it by hanging weights off of it, off of a certain distance, and they know it takes this much force to make the gauge move this much. That gauge is attached to the dyno. So as the dyno accelerates, or as the engine accelerates, it's moving the strain gauge. And from that, the dyno itself can say, hey, it took this much force to move the strain gauge, and that's how it got its torque value. The horsepower is actually calculated based off RPM. So there's a math thing for it, and I won't bore you with it, but horsepower is a function of torque. So it measures torque, then it uses mathematical calculation to do horsepower. That's how it basically works. Now, here's where things get a little different from dynos to dyno, and this is really the biggest reason why I wanted to talk about this. Dynos are usually in a cell, like you can think of a room, and that's where they're doing all the dyno stuff. Usually they have something called I don't know the exact name for it, but it's got a weather station in that dyno that's going to measure the air temperature, air pressure, the humidity. I'm sure there's other stuff too, but I think those are the biggest ones that it records. And the reason for that becomes really simple in a minute. So as the engine runs, the weather station is recording all those factors. And what happens is as the engine runs, it's going to pop out a uncorrected number. So let's say it's 500, for instance. let's say it makes 500 horsepower uncorrected. This means exactly what it makes right there, this moment on the dyno with that air made 500. The weather station then says, you know what? You're like 90 degrees and you got 50% humidity and you're at that's everyone's elevation. You're at this elevation and the barometric pressure is this. I really think using my mathematical calculation that if we take your uncorrected numbers, that really at sea level you would be this. And it gives a correction factor to make it seem like what you would make at sea level. And I know some of you are already bored out of your mind with this. This is actually pretty important. The reason for that is this. If I dynoed my engine, say here in Oklahoma, in a hot summer day, and then I went to, say, Arizona, somewhere close to sea level, or not even Arizona, say California, somewhere close to sea level on a much cooler day, low humidity, if we dynoed them both using just uncorrected numbers, that engine's gonna look phenomenal in California. It's gonna look like a piece of crap in Oklahoma. It's gonna look even worse in Colorado where I'm 1,000 or a mile high in the sky. So to make up for that, that weather station and that dyno correction factor is supposed to make, no matter where you dyno it in the world, that engine should make the same power. So if I took this engine, say, to Oklahoma, then to Denver, then to California, it should make the same corrected anywhere. That's the idea. And you're like, what's this got to do with anything? I had told you before this engine had been dynoed before I ever put it in the truck. And for those that don't know, I'm going to pop up dyno sheets. Hopefully I'll squeeze it in right here, so I'll pause. These were what it did before. And if you look, on methanol it made 672, and on gas it made 652. And you're like, well, I don't think you did that at all here. It doesn't show it on the track performance, nothing. Can't argue with that. But here's the thing. I'm going to show you two videos in this. At the end of this video, you're going to see two videos. You're going to see the dyno of the gas running at Dunsworth Machine Shop, and then you're going to see the dyno running at the Gaines Grinding. Both were the same engine. And what you're going to see is the uncorrected numbers, because this is the weird part, and this is the reason why I wanted to get to you. If you look at the two, the uncorrected numbers are really not that far off. Now, the weather conditions were close, but not the same. So if you look at them, for instance, Dunsworth was about 507, it showed uncorrected. And at Gaines, it showed about 520. That's 13 horsepower difference. That's not huge. But when you look at the corrected numbers, that's the big difference. So you have Dunsworth was at 580, and like I said, I think Gaines was in the 660s or something. So why is it different? And this is the reason for the part of the beginning of this video. The correction factor. That is the biggest thing that throws a lot of them off. If you look, both of them should have about the same correction factor. They're in the same air. They both should have read the same. But from dyno to dyno, there's other correction factors that are added in. And let me briefly try to explain this. On the Superflow 902 that Dunsworth was on, it doesn't have an inertia, at least that I'm aware of, an inertia correction factor. And there's another one for something else that's also in there too. On Gaines, they do. And the reason why it's, even though it's a Superflow dyno, it's a power mark and it's got a drive shaft that connects to the water hub. So in that version of the software, it says, hey, you really want to know how much power it makes. Well, it takes so much power to drive this drive shaft. And you know what? It takes a certain amount of horsepower to actually turn your engine. So we're going to correct that too. So it makes it look higher. So according to that power mark, it's like as saying, this is truly what your engine makes for power, forgetting all your rotating assembly. The 902 is pretty much saying, hey, this is what you're actually making when I could just correct for weather. I'm not taking out all that other stuff. So it's not the measured horsepower were really close. The corrected horsepowers were off, and that's due to the software. Side note for you guys all, dynos, depending on what brand, even though they're all owned by the same company anymore, can have different correction factors. So they might measure the same, but the correction factors can be off. So I wanted to get that out of the way because I know in the comments someone's gonna be like, the other dyno was cheating. They really weren't. Both measured pretty close, but the software correction versus the one from the 902, the power mark, was different. I'm fairly certain though that you can go into the power mark and you can change it to make it read the same as the 902. I'm sure some people are gonna beat me up for that. But I wanted to cover that first before we ever got into this, because I don't want you thinking, you lied to us. Because if you look, they both, again, corrected the same. It's the uncorrected numbers were the same-ish. The corrected numbers were the farthest off. It's just in the software and their not so much calibrations, but their correction factors. And that's the reason why I kind of like Dunsworth. I really think it'd run probably close to what it says on that dyno at sea level. But now for the part you really wanted to hear about, the engine. So thanks for your patience with this, but I really wanted to explain that first. So let's get to the engine and then our fuel stuff, the things you came to see. Here is the engine. Now I'm going to give you the full rundown of the specs, just so you can see how it actually compares on E85, and maybe you got something similar. Before I do this, I'm going to real quickly say, when I initially built this engine, I was just throwing together pieces that I already had. So if you're like, why didn't you do this or this? It's partly because I just had what I had. So start off with that. The block is a GM block. It started its life as a 2-bolt main block. It is an 010 block for those that are wondering. However, it now has the Eagle splayed caps. They used to make those billet splayed caps on the center 3. It's now a 4040 bore, and it's still a 350. It has a SCAT 4340 forged crank. It's not lightweight or anything, but it is a 4340 forged crank. It has a SCAT I-beam rods with the 7/16 cap screws, but I do use the ARP 2000 cap screws instead of the 8740s. It has SRP Professional Series pistons. They are the dome ones, so if you look for a 350 and you're trying to figure it out, it's the one with the dome. It nets about 11.9 compression ratio. I did have, after I bought the pistons though, I had them gas ported laterally, so that is there. The heads are my ported Brodix Dragon Slayers. These are actually very large. This was more of an experiment too. So when I ported these, they end up being 241 cc's, which you're like, oh my God, that's huge for a 350. Could be the reason why I made so much peak power way up in the RPM. The pinch measure 2.63. It has a 208 intake valve, a 1/600 exhaust valve. It does have a hollow stem intake valve. These things, I think they flowed 322 on a 4030 bore. They probably would be about 330 on the 4155, but it doesn't really matter. Let's see if there's anything else in the heads. Nope. The camshaft is a comp cams that I spec'd. It's a solid roller. It has 780 lift on the intake, and I think 680-ish on the exhaust. Duration is 252 on intake at 50 and 258 on the exhaust. You might say, why didn't you add more exhaust timing? Because I was out of piston to valve clearance. The rockers are Jessel's Sportsman shaft rockers, 1/7/1/6 ratio, and 3/8 push rod heavy wall. Intake is a BM 1000 Brodix. I've ported it as well, and the carburetors were 3, and I'll do a picture and describe those, but they're all about 1000 CFM. We got the 1000 CFM race demon that was redone by Mark Whitener. I have the 1000 CFM methanol carburetor, also done by Mark Whitener. And the E85 carburetor was a one done by Tyler TPV Productions. It's about 1000 CFMs too. And that's pretty much the rundown of engine, but I do want to say this. So I wanted to make it run as close on the dyno as it was on the truck. So what I did is I pulled out, this is the ignition box from the truck. And you might say, why did you do that? Well, because one, it has this is programmable, so it actually has the timing curve in there that was running in the truck. And also it's simple to change timing. I don't have to undo the distributor. I just plug in a laptop and I can change timing pretty quickly. This was used on the majority of the pools, except for we had a problem with it once we got to methanol, which would be the 2nd series. One of the biggest problems was this. This is the trigger wires. It had landed on the header and it melted. Now he had a spare and he put that on, but it still was doing weird stuff. And I'll get to that in a minute, but that was used too. So as much of the stuff from the truck was used as possible, with the exception of the headers. And the biggest reason for the headers was, and the headers might have actually picked it up, was the truck headers are 1 3/4 step to 1 7/8, and then we've got a merge collector and a 3-inch. Let me show you real quick. That's them. Okay, and you can kind of see their header wrapped. There's your merge collector. So the biggest problem is, the reason why I didn't bring them is because it won't work with this dyno. It's actually this tube right here. This tube comes down and inside the frame rail, and it would have hit his dyno cart. So I couldn't bring it. It wouldn't have fit on his dyno. It would have been interesting to see because these tubes are actually longer than what he runs. So it may have brought up the torque a smidge. I'm sure the collector would have too. but I don't think it'd been like a huge gain. Probably no more than 8 to 10 horsepower swing or torque either way. But couldn't run it anyway. It just wouldn't fit with this dyno. So that's the engine. Let's get to the dyno pulls and runs. Here is the first dyno pull to 7,500 RPM. Now, you'll get to see the video in just a second. It's a really quick run of it, but you'll see that the water temperature and the oil temperature is relatively warm, and this would be a really close representation of how I actually ran on the track. There is no air bonnet that's on it. I do have an air cleaner that I ran in the truck, but it wasn't on this engine. I probably should have brought it just because curious to see what it would do. But this is how the first run is on gas, the exact same jetting, exact same timing curve in it. In case you're wondering what timing it actually has for peak, it's 36 degrees. And this is exactly how it ran. Now, you might be asking yourself, hey, where's the O2s on here? Well, here's a little thing about it. The O2s weren't recorded, and here's why. The way we usually record the O2s on there, we have a calculated one. So there's an air hat that goes over the carburetor, and there's a turbine in there that spins, and it measures the amount of airflow. We then use how much fuel it actually flows, and it calculates the air-fuel ratio. The day before, he called and said he had a backfire of an engine that was on the dyno, and it actually blew out those fan blades. So because of that, I couldn't use that. But I was like, no problem, I'll bring an O2 sensor. So I brought an O2 sensor from the Sniper setup, and I thought, well, I can measure it. Well, I forgot one wire, and the wire that it needs is the one that gets the TAC output, because the O2 sensor will not read if there's no TAC sensor or RPM signal sent to it. It won't show up on the screen. So O2s weren't used at all, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way. There's a few ways you can use. One, you can use brake specifics, what you see over the side. If you look at that, it's kind of rich for gas. Usually gas will run, and it varies on engines, by the way. Between 390 is pretty lean, and usually 0.50 is pretty rich. Usually in the 440, 460 range, somewhere in there. This one, if you look, it's right for most of it, then it starts going rich according to that. So then the next thing you look at is the EGTs, and the EGTs actually looked pretty good. But the last thing to look at is the spark plugs. And the spark plug said, don't touch a thing, you're exactly where it should be. And at the track, I had tried different jetting and just slowed down. So from the rest of this on, you'll never hear any O2 sensor stuff, and it's kind of bad that we didn't. It was just bad luck on that part. But this is the exact way the car ran on the track. Here's that power. This is the last gas pull we did. We only made 3 pulls. The only thing that changed from this pull to the last pull is very simple. We cooled the water down. So the water temperature got down about 150 and the oil temperature was pretty high. Usually this yields a better horsepower and torque number, and that's what it did. This would be a kind of what it would be like if you raced at a cooler temperature, what it would be like. So just for the record, the best time on gas that ever went was a 1086 at 125-ish. And that was with a turbo 350. So there's the best gas pull. So we have 580 horsepower, and it looks like 465 foot-pounds of torque. Now on the next one's going to be methanol. This is the first pull on methanol. So what we did is right after the gas, and we did it as quick as possible just so we keep the temperatures up, because as you know, methanol runs cooler. All we did is we drained the entire fuel system for the dyno real quick. Gary was doing that while I changed the carburetor. The carburetor was run with the exact same jetting that it had when it was in the truck. I didn't change jetting at all. The timing was left exactly the same. This is exactly how it ran in the truck. This is the first pull, so I say this because if you notice the next pull will change, and it's because there might have still been a little bit of gas left in the system. That's why I made a few runs just to make sure it was totally on methanol, this being the first. You could tell that's a huge gain over gas.
Oops, gonna have some power. That doesn't sound like the transition in it's that bad at all. Like what you thought it would be.
Yeah. This is just a backup pull of the previous pull. All we did is finish pulling the engine, printed it out, started to back up, and made this pull. We started to have something weird stuff come up, and it sounded like the engine had like it was going hitting the rev limiter right at the end. That's why it dropped off there. So we went out and looked at it, and we found a few things. One of the things we found was this. The trigger wire for the MSD box had landed on the header and it had done this. Now, it doesn't look like any wires are exposed, but we went ahead and changed it. And while I was at it, I went into the ignition box to make sure the rev limiter wasn't set too low. And it was actually set at 8,400 RPM, so for whatever reason, it felt like it was kicking in early. But since we changed the trigger wire, we went ahead and made another pull, and it did this.
That sounded more like a rev.
We changed the trigger wire, and I didn't touch the rev limiter because it was the 8,400, and the thing still kicked in. Now this one even harder. So, and I do notice that it did the same thing at the track, and I always thought, well, it just kind of weird things, because there were several times I know the rev limiter was set high and it wouldn't go there, and it felt like the rev limiter was kicking in early. So Gary Dunsworth, he has an ignition box that they use on the dyno, and it's just an old 7AL box. So he said, well, we can do something really quick. We can just switch over to my box. I said, well, that's fine, except for I have a timing curve in this. And he goes, well, that's okay. So what we did is we just unplugged my stuff and plugged his 7AL in too. But because I have the timing on the distributor set at 38 degrees, now this changes the timing from 36 degrees to 38 degrees. So this next pull you see is adding 2 more degrees of timing, but there is no curve. It's straight the whole way. And by the way, on all the other ones, full timing was in by 52. So just letting you know, actually a little bit earlier than that, 5,000. So it had full timing at 36 on all the runs until this next one, which was 38 degrees with the 7AL box. fix that. Here's the best methanol run. So now we switch to the 7AL2. It's at 38 degrees of timing. The ignition box, because it's switched now, the rev limiter thing at the end is now fixed. It holds its power to the end. The 38 degrees of timing did pick it up, and you'll see at the very end of the dyno run, you'll see a graph, and that's the graph versus 36 versus 38. You could see in the lower RPMs it didn't do anything. In the higher RPMs it gained a little. From this point on, all we did is run the same ignition timing when we switched to E85. 38 degrees, this ignition box. Pulled the spark plug. The timing looked like it was perfect anyway. However, it was rich on methanol. Chances are I probably could have picked up a little bit more horsepower but traded torque if I had taken some jet out. You might ask yourself, why didn't you do that then? Well, here's the reason why. I didn't have O2, so it's, even though I'm checking the spark plugs, it's still kind of a guess. I think I probably could have taken 4 out all the way, and it would have probably lost some torque, probably maybe 10 foot-pounds, and probably would have gained 10 horsepower. Methanol is kind of weird that way. When they're super rich, they'll make great torque, and you'll gain a little bit of horsepower if you lean them out. So it's kind of a weird trade-off. Usually on like gas, if you get them the jetting right, they pick up both. Methanol is kind of weird that way because of the cooling effect. Anyway, from this point on, the timing's left the same, and we're on to E85, but now we're pretty close. We hit almost 600 horsepower with the methanol. This is the first E85 run. We drained all the lines in the dyno and stuff and did it as quick as possible, again, to kind of keep the oil temperatures high because, remember, it's going to cool the charge anyway. So we're trying to keep them the same, which we got close, but it for sure wasn't exact. Threw this carburetor on, no jet change. This one never got ran to the track because of the wheel studs being bent. But this is what it did. And if you look at it, the peak power is pretty close to what the methanol is, but there still might have been a little bit of methanol in the line, so we're going to do a backup run right after this. This is the E85 backup run. This ends up being the highest E85 run. We're going to try one more thing after this, but it doesn't really pick it up, but I thought it should. Yeah, if you look at the peaks, though, they're really close to methanol, but when I show you the graphs, the difference is night and day on how much difference there is with methanol versus E85. By the way, I know someone's going to mention this. Is this pump E85? No, this was actually race E85, so it's actually true E85. This is the final pull we did, and it's on E85. The only thing we did was we tried to cool down the engine, get the water temperature down. However, it didn't get as cool as we liked, and I'm going to tell you why. And this was a mistake, and you can probably see it in the dyno runs videos. You see steam coming off. Here's the reason why. On the front of the engine where the water neck is, there's a radiator cap I used to fill the engine. Well, that cap was leaking, so it was actually steaming out the water the whole time. It made a hell of a mess through most of the pulls. That's also why I couldn't keep the water temperatures as even as I'd like to anyway, because of that. It was the longer you could run it to get it at the same temperature, the more water it's putting everywhere because that cap just is not staying closed. We tried a different cap, it wouldn't seal either. There's definitely something going on wrong with there. It was kind of doing that in the truck, but I thought it was the fitting below it that was leaking. But yeah, it's something with that top piece. Luckily, the new motor is not going to have that problem. But it didn't make any difference cooling it off, really. We only cooled it off about 10 degrees. Didn't seem like it made any difference at all. Oddly enough, we checked the exhaust gas temperature on this one just to see how that looked too. And I did pull a spark plug. It looked a little lean, but a little bit leaner than what it was on, say, for the gas, but not horrible. The exhaust gas temperatures were actually really close to what the gas one was. So I don't think it's that far off. It does have some weird transitions. When you see the graph, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. Here's the graph of all three fuels. And if you look at them, the methanol and E85 at peak, they're really close. So you would say, hey man, that looks like it's definitely a win for E85. But if you ignore the rest of the curve, it might look that way. But look at the rest of the curve and you can see how much better methanol is. It definitely picked it up just everywhere and by a lot. As a matter of fact, if you look at the lower RPM, gas is actually beating E85 at that point. And I don't think it's that necessarily the 85. I think the real reason is that during that point, it's pretty lean. Then it goes to where it should be. And that's why I think it's losing out to gas at the lower RPMs. Methanol, on the other hand, its gap might have been closed it might have shrunk down had I leaned it out. Because I did go back and look at the data, and it is pretty rich. If I had leaned it out, it probably would have dropped that torque down and boosted the horsepower up top more. And maybe I should have done that, but I just didn't. But anyway, here's the interesting part. On gas, in the same conditions, in the truck, it ran 11.0 like 123. When we switched to methanol, it went 1077 at 125. If you look at the peak horsepower difference, that's only 20 horsepower. So if someone came up to you and said, you only have to gain 20 horsepower to go 0.2 faster, you would say, no way. Well, it's not the peak, it's the rest of the curve. And you can see how much stronger it is to accelerate that truck. And that's the reason why I did it. Now, there's one more quick thing I want to show you guys, and then we'll be on our way. This is the two dyno sheets. So we have the new one that was just done through this whole video, and the other one to the right is the dyno sheet from when the engine was first dynoed at a different dyno's place. If you notice them, it's the same engine. There's very similar headers at this point that was used. Same 1000 CFM. Both of these are on gas. If you look how close they don't appear to be. They look way off, but if you look at the fuel flow, it's similar and some other things as well. I'm going to show you the uncorrected numbers for the dyno run that created the 652 horsepower and the uncorrected one that we just did. And I want you to compare those because remember at the very beginning of the video, I was going to say this, both of them look very close to the same. It's the correction that's different. So I only point this out because I know some of you right now are saying, man, I can do better on the 350. My 350 makes more power than that, whatever. Feel free to bring it. Let's feel free. But look at this, same engine, two different dynos, and they read the same as far as measured. The corrected was different. So there you go. Anyway, I wanted to bring that up. So the next thing you're going to see is the two dyno videos, but you won't hear me talk anymore. Guys, thanks for watching this very long video. And remember, I'm no Superman, and you guys take care.